Hey guys, it's Kevin again, finally here to do a review of Chernobyl. And of course, this story recalls the true events of this terrible nuclear disaster that happened around 1986 in the Soviet Union. It was absolutely devastating. This waste leaked out. It ruined an entire population. And this series essentially is basically about how this man-made catastrophe happened. How did anyone let it happen? Who should be held culpable for it? But also showing the efforts that the first responders and firefighters went in an attempt to assuage this population of people and also the impact it had on them. So, Chernobyl overall, I was very interested in the show. I wouldn't say I was excited because for something like this, it's not an exciting show. This is an extremely tragic event for sure, but it was one that I was fascinated by. I've always known about Chernobyl, but I didn't really know too much about the full extent of it. I just knew it was something that happened in like the Soviet Union, and so I was excited to see how they would dive into it here. HBO, you guys know how high of a standard I hold them to it, and everyone was praising it. For some reason, it took me so long to get through it, though. I watched the first two episodes, and I meant to finish it, but I had to finish all these other seasons of TV, and I finally got to Chernobyl, and I have to say, Chernobyl is absolutely worth the hype. This is an extremely harrowing and tragic watch, but one that I cannot recommend enough. It is definitely one of the best shows of the entire year, and we're just getting to right now, starting off with the cast. And I mean, when it comes to this show, that's one of the best things about it. Everyone here is so well casted. Everyone does such an incredible job. But I have to talk about Jared Harris, who, I mean, I've seen this guy in other things before. He was in an episode of The Crown. I know he was in The Terror last year. Unfortunately, I never got to that one. But I really wish I did because he is phenomenal here as the character of Valery Legislov. I thought he did such a fantastic job in this role. Valery is someone who he knows a lot of what's actually happening, but he has to try to be as careful as he can because he needs to protect, the reputation of like the Soviet Union and things like that, and just the arc that he goes through and the lengths that he goes to make sure that this is fixed in the way it should is amazing to behold. I think he has some truly standout moments, and I know he's gotten like Emmy nominations and things like that, and it is definitely he definitely is very deserving of those because he absolutely killed it here. I think he gives one of the best performances of the entire year, movies, TV, you name it, and I just absolutely loved what he did here. Such an incredible performance for sure. And then Stellan Skarsgard as well. I mean, this is another really great performance from him. I've always really liked Stellan Skarsgard, but this is probably the best work I've ever seen from him. I think he did a fantastic job in the show as well. The relation between him and Legislav especially is definitely very fascinating. Boris is one of the only truly good people in this show who actually cares about this tragedy and isn't just doing it to, and actually wants to do something about it, and I thought he did a really good job here for sure. And then Emily Watson as well is so good in this show. I loved her here. She's the only character here, to my knowledge, that is not based off of a real person. Well, one of the only. Alana Komik is not a real person. She's just based on the scientists that really wanted to get the answers here, and she does a really great job. She is just absolutely relentless in making sure that she figures out how justice can be done here. You can see how much she cares about all of this, and just this trio alone is enough for reason to watch the show. They really do anchor it for sure. But the supporting cast as well also turns out some amazing work. Jessie Buckley is phenomenal here as the character of Lamula, of Litamula, Ignatenko. I thought she was fantastic. I really loved her performance here. She definitely goes through some really tough stuff in this show, but I thought she did a really great job. Barry Keoghan shows up early on, later in the season, and he's really good. Ferns is really great here. Paul Ritter, though, let me just say, this is a guy who, there's a lot of characters you're gonna hate, in TVs and movies this year. Dyatlov, though, this is, I mean, it is rare that you hate someone as much as you do with Dyatlov. I mean, this guy is just so selfish and really does whatever he can to make himself look good, doesn't really take the blame for anything that happened, and Paul Ritter is just so good in this role, really just showing, again, just how self-righteous this guy was and how little of a shit he cares for what's actually happened. And, I mean, you want to see justice done. You want to see this guy put behind bars, and he does some fantastic work here. Con O'Neill's also really great. Really, the entire cast, I mean, everyone really does give a standout performance here. It's one of the most well-acted shows of the entire year for sure, and I really can't think of a single weak link in this entire cast. But now let's get to the directing here, because that's probably one of the most fascinating things about this entire series. I mean, you would think for a show that is operating at this level and is this horrifying and eye-opening in that way, you would think this would be helmed by very recognizable, talent that has done stuff like this before. But that's actually not the case. The main creators of this show, one of them, who directs every single episode. His name is Johan Renck. He's literally only done like a few like TV commercials and things like that. Nothing of this scale before. And then the main creator of all this, Craig Mason, this is the guy behind like Scary Movie and Identity Thief and things like that. So he has never touched something like this before. And just the fact that they haven't done something like this, it makes this that much more impressive of directing. I think that they did an extraordinary job with this series, and it proves that, you know, just because a director isn't working in one genre doesn't mean they're not talented. They need the right material, and Craig Mason is exactly like that. He's someone who clearly he was stuck doing comedies, and he came up with this idea, and he's like, you know what, I want to do this. And I hope that this gets him to tackle more challenging stuff, because he very much proves that he can do it here. He helms this entire show effortlessly. This is a bleak and haunting watch. There's barely any humor in this. There is, honestly, maybe just a few instances here and there. You wouldn't dare think that this guy did stuff like Scary Movie, but he did, and I think it's remarkable that he was able to pull this off as well as he did. His directing here is just so fearless. He feels like someone who has had years of experience with doing material like this, and it's just amazing to behold. It's, again, a very grueling watch for sure. Definitely for some people, this is going to be a very hard watch, but I am just so happy that Mason was able to go there, especially considering, again, how unfamiliar he was with this kind of storytelling, and I think he did a remarkable job here. So easily some of the best directing here for sure. And then the writing, I mean, what can I say about the screenplay that hasn't already been done before? It is such a well-written story, mainly because it's not just about the Chernobyl disaster, it's about the implications and the effects that it has on everyone. I mean, every single character in this is deeply affected by this tragedy, and it really underscores just how big of a deal this really was. I mean, you take a character like, say, Jessie Buckley's, for example. This is a woman who she is happily married to this man. But he is very early on in the series exposed to radiation, but still, she wants to keep that hope that nothing bad is going to happen, that they're going to be able to overcome this. And this applies for many of the characters here. Many of these characters are naive. They don't realize the severity of the situation. They think, oh, this is just going to pass. It's not a big deal. It's, you know, a small man-made catastrophe. It's not something to really worry about. But obviously it escalates into something much bigger, and it gets more and more, progressively worse throughout the series, and I think that the writing really did a great job with that, and because that there's difficult questions that our three main characters need to ask. Our main character, especially Valeri, I mean, this is a guy who he knows the truth of what has happened here. He knows exactly what has caused this disaster, but because he needs to keep the integrity of the Soviet Union, who at the time were very well respected and were seen as perfect. They were seen as someone who they don't make any mistakes. Everything they do is meticulously crafted. Everything they do is very delicate. Almost as meticulously crafted as the directing in this series. That's how people see them. They hold them to that high of a standard. So he has this information, but he has to kind of withhold it throughout the entire series. So you really do feel for him here. And you yourself are also wondering, like, what does he know? What exactly caused all of this? Because they hint at what might have caused it, but we actually don't know what caused it until the last episode of the series. And I think that was a very smart choice. I feel like a lesser series, would tell you what happened from the get-go, but here they only allude to things. They don't actually tell you the full extent of how this all went down until the final episode, and again, it really gets us to latch onto this character, and I think they did a really great job with that here. Or say someone like Emily Watson's character, you contrast that with Valeri. Olana is someone who, she just wants answers pronto. She doesn't want to have to wait. She knows that there's something more going on, and she is destined to get to the bottom of things, and you really do feel for her in that sense too. She wants to expose whoever did this tragedy. She knows it wasn't just a small instance. She knows some sort of incompetence must have caused this, and I thought that that story was also really great. Every single character I really did latch onto in the way, even the slimiest of them all. Like I said, someone like, say, Anatoly Dyatlov, who wants to basically just, disregard this entire situation and just pass it off as something as little as just a small incident that occurred. He doesn't really want to recognize, just how disastrous this really was. You do understand where those characters are coming from. It feels very real in that sense, that he wants to protect that integrity. Again, he's still a terrible person and a very slimy individual that absolutely deserves what ends up happening to him. I'm not going to get into that too much, but even characters like that, they feel very well established in that way. Or even smaller characters, like there's this woman, for example, in the 4th episode. I don't want to get into it too much, but she lives in this house, and her house is contaminated with radiation. It's like dilapidated. It's not a safe place to be in this environment. But she feels like she has to stay there because she's been here all her life. And you see how eventually she does have to get out of this. This eventually, it does cost her. Nobody is safe in this show. Nobody, just because they are a good person, that doesn't mean that they are safe from this tragedy. Stellan Skarsgard's character is probably out of all of them the most morally right character out of everyone, and he even has to suffer through this. I don't want to get into why, but there's a scene in the finale of this episode, and you feel terrible because he had to suffer through this, and a lot of other characters also had to suffer through this, and it's just really tragic to behold, but the show doesn't shy away from anything, and that's something I really adored about it. Unlike a show that I didn't review, The Hot Zone, I was gonna review that show, but I stopped watching it because it just felt so sanitized to me. This show is the complete opposite. It really gets into the nitty-gritty of what really happened here and how much these characters suffered and the circumstances they had to go through, and it's just devastating to behold, but they do a fantastic job with that for sure. And that also goes back to the cinematography, which is just astounding in this show. You would think that they were actually in this situation. The way they're able to recreate all of this toxic waste just being, all the contamination, like, throughout the city, it's phenomenal. I have no idea how they did as well as they did, but there are many moments here that you're truly never gonna forget. There are moments here that are kind of ingrained in my memory forever because they're just so hard to watch, but yet you can't look away because of how visually stunning the show is. I mean, right from the first episode, there is a scene that just absolutely floored me. It floored me with what they were showing, but it definitely did happen, and that's the thing. The show wants to put you in that situation. It wants to show what these characters went through, how naive everyone was, how they didn't really know what was happening. From the first episode alone, you really do get into that, and again, the show is very gruesome. It definitely does not hold back. You see the impact that this has on someone who even seems like they were mildly exposed to the radiation. you really get to see how that starts to eat away at them very physically. And again, it's definitely very hard to watch, but it's impressive throughout the entire show. There's this tracking shot in episode 4, especially, that just, it's one of the most stunning things I have seen all year. I can't praise the cinematography enough. I have no idea how they pulled it off as well as they did, but this show is constantly operating at a incredibly high level when it comes to cinematography, and I really don't know how they did as well as they did, but it is remarkable to behold for sure. The score in this show, it's minimal. They don't use it a lot, but when it's used, it is definitely very effective. It really ramps up the tension in that way. In fact, there are sequences in this show that almost play out like a horror movie, because that's really what this was. I mean, this was a real-life horror movie. Something like this should have never happened. And the fact that it did happen is just terrifying to think about. The fact that this entire city was basically, everywhere they turned, they were exposed to radiation. Even, like I said, just the littlest bits could affect them in that way. And it's incredible. I love the score here when it's used. It plays into the show very well, and I thought they did a great job with it. And the editing, that's really my only complaint with the show. The show, because of the fact that it is so grueling, and because of the fact that for a while you don't have a very clear-cut idea of like how this all happened, there are some moments where it can get a little slow. Not boring. Not boring. The show is never boring. I want to reiterate that. But there are some pacing issues that I think certain episodes had. But aside from that, the pacing here is really great. The editing to the show is fantastic. It's only 5 episodes. It didn't need to be any longer, honestly. I think they did a really great job with these 5 episodes, demonstrating as much as they can, trying to showcase this. And I feel like if it was longer, it'd be like overkill, because again, it's a very hard watch for sure, and I think definitely they did what they needed to do there, really exploring all avenues that they possibly could. And in the finale especially, I thought was probably, besides the first episode, the most well-paced episode of the entire show. You really do get a good idea of those answers, and really scaling back on just the corrupt nature of it all, and how, who really is to blame for this. You really start to see what kind of message the show is trying to drive at. Overall, guys, I can't praise Chernobyl enough. This is such a fantastic show that we rarely do get to see on this level. I think that just technically, writing wise, acting wise, there's so much to really just adore about the show. But again, it's definitely not for the faint of heart. It is incredibly graphic. It's very brutal. It's rarely ever even somewhat uplifting. This is a very tragic show, and it might be hard for some to watch. But if you can dedicate just a few hours to it, and if you can handle it, I can't recommend enough. I think this is a must-see for sure. I think it is every bit worth the praise. And so, for that reason alone, I'm absolutely going to give Chernobyl overall an A. Again, I have no idea why it took me so long to finally cover this series. I've wanted to talk about it for a very long time, but I finally finished it. I have one more show, I promise, one more show, and then my top 10 summer shows list will be up. I just wanted to have the most complete list as possible, but that's it for this video. Hope you guys enjoy it. We'll see you guys in my next video, and we'll see you guys for that. Okay, bye.